anybody misses the session, needs to catch up for some reason, or you want to go back and see something again. But I thought it was a really good session last time. Thank you for the wonderful interaction and input. And I'm going to share some slides to get us going. And I'll explain what we're going to cover off today. Okay, so last week we were well into the philosophy of the safe system. And last session we were well into the philosophy of the safe system. This one we're going to focus down into the road environment, where a lot of you, that's a lot of the work a lot of you do. So we'll delve into that. As mentioned, we're recording this. Okay, this session, remember to count your wallies, of course. We're going to do some work in estimating kinetic energy thresholds for different crash types and intersections, and then looking at what characteristics of intersections align highly with safe system principles. And then we'll do the same for mid-blocks. Mid-blocks being the term we use for between intersections. That is, it's the mid-block section. So what aligns highly with safe system principles, and by sort of default, what doesn't align highly. Now, remember, you can type your questions into the chat or the Q&A at any point as I'm going. Don't wait for me to pause. Just type it in, and I'll periodically have a look at the chat and try to answer any questions, or maybe take some on for the next session. There is a little intersection activity for you to do coming up fairly shortly, and I'll give you a good bit of time on that. So you'll also be able to have a stretch and fill up your water and things at that point. Okay, let's talk about intersections. Intersections are a very interesting part of our road network, in the sense that obviously they have the conflict points where vehicles can crash, and also pedestrians are crossing usually, or a lot of the time, and we have bicycles and motorcycles and all going through there. The interesting thing, when you look at the risk of a road network, there is a spike around intersections, absolutely. The spike is not just for the crash that you're sort of seeing there with the vehicle-to-vehicle crash. We do have that spike in pedestrian, as I mentioned, and cyclists, but we have a spike also in runoff road crashes around intersections. And that's interesting. The reasoning behind that is that we do have a lot of fixed hazards that we put around intersections. So they could be your signal pedestals, they could be power poles. They often, your power poles, it's a good spot to have a power pole near an intersection if you're running power lines up or down, or going around those areas. And so we do sort of put these fixed hazards around there. And then we have this turbulence at intersections where vehicles may not necessarily hit each other, but if there is one that pulls out and another one avoids, we see that runoff road crashes can precipitate from those interactions, or even, clipping vehicles and, as I mentioned, especially avoiding things. So it is quite an area of spiked risk. And you'll see that from any sort of risk output, like an IRAP, the International Road Assessment Program, or OSRAP, or an ANREM, the Australian National Risk Assessment Model, where you'll see sort of a graph of risk along a route, and it'll sort of plot along, and then it'll spike up, and it'll plot along, and it'll spike up, and then spike right up, and it'll go like that. And of course, these are going to be your intersections. It's not to say that these areas don't have risk. They'll have some sort of risk. It just goes higher at those locations. So at a really high level, Monash University Accident Research Centre popped together these sort of high-level design principles, or principles for intersection design to align highly with safe system. Now, this goes from a sort of planning level to a design level, so don't just take the ideas out of this. But it's interesting, the first two there, fewer vehicles and fewer intersections, they are working on that exposure. Remember, we talked about exposure and likelihood and severity. being the three variables: exposure, likelihood, severity, is what we're sort of looking at under these safe system assessments and the safe system risk assessment methodology. So the first two are there. Can we reduce the exposure to crashes? The next one, conflict points. In a safe system assessment, this is the likelihood factor, okay? Because we've taken into account the exposure of vehicles, the number of vehicles there. This then is the likelihood. So if we've still got the same number of vehicles going through there, they just have less conflict points. We say it's a reduced likelihood factor for crashes at that intersection. And for those who don't sort of use that language, conflict point, in a few slides time, I'll show you some conflict point diagrams and the like, so you'll get more comfortable with that. Then in this, they go into the severity factors. And now we're talking about speeds and impact angles, okay? So we're talking about vehicles striking other vehicles or pedestrians or cyclists, but we're looking at what is going to make this more severe? And can we get those into biomechanically tolerable levels? That's the force that the human body can handle. And so some general guidance there, we talked about this sort of stuff, 90-degree collision, we're looking at that 50 kilometre per hour for passenger vehicles. So that's, bullet vehicle speed, 50 kilometres per hour. If you can get a bit more angle on that, we're into more the, a little bit up from 50 potentially. So if you can crash more at this angle, you get more of your energy dissipated into the environment. It's a bit of a bounce off to a degree. Rather than directed into the occupant. So we can do that a bit higher within the safe system sort of tolerable speeds. And to a degree, more head on, we can handle a little higher speeds because that activates some of the critical safety features in passenger vehicles, being crumple zones, airbags, seatbelts. They're all a frontal crash severity mitigation technique. They all come into play in that crash. In the direct side impact crash, the right angle T-bone style crash, the side of the vehicle is very poorly set up for absorption of energy. Get a little bit for that side curtain airbag, but really not a great structure for that crash. Of course, the vulnerable road users, we're looking at 30 kilometre per hour speeds or below. The angle of crash, not that important when you're talking vulnerable road users. And then we really look, if we can't be meeting these, to how can we mitigate the risk down to negligible levels. So there's sort of high level, principles there. We will delve into this in a little more detail, but really interesting in there was a lot of concentration there on speeds and angles, wasn't there? And speed and angle become really important factors for us to consider under a safe system assessment to understand the severity of crashes between passenger vehicles and to a degree with larger vehicles as well, heavy vehicles. And there are those sort of speeds and angles that we are generally talking about as our safe system tolerable speeds. Now you'll see there the 60 for those angles between there, and they're from a tool called ChemX, which is the kinetic energy management model. Now you do not, as a safe system assessor, need to go to the level of detail of utilizing a tool like ChemX. Okay, we as safe system assessors are really looking at a fairly broad brush indication of severity of crashes. Those tools are try to delve into a lot of detail. But you can really just be utilizing these sorts of angles and speeds and vehicle types and that colorful chart that I showed you in the last module. So, if there's a new intersection proposed, an access point or the like, you don't need to go to this precision of angle of crash potential. So these are the sort of conflict points there, each of those points where things are crossing, we call a conflict point. you can sort of go, oh yeah, they're coming out from here and crashing down here. So that's about a 90-degree crash. So we're talking about 50 km/h or so or below. But when they're coming onto the other side of the road, those crashes, they're a more a friendlier angle. So we could be up around the 60 km/h as our threshold speeds. So you can be, a little more generic with it. And as I talked about there, earlier, we got to think about runoff road crashes and secondary crash impacts at intersections. So yes, we think about this instantaneous or the initial crash, but we do get after the vehicles crash, a secondary crash often, or the vehicle clips off the other vehicle or avoids and runs off the road. And here's some research that came out of, excuse me, the Centre for Automotive Safety Research at the University of Adelaide. And they replotted a heap of crashes, serious injury and fatal crashes, just onto a graph here in the same direction, and showed that the majority are secondary, or the majority of secondary crashes causing death and serious injury were occurring to about there. Did they need to do that research to tell us that? I think you probably all would have come to the same conclusion without doing the research, but nonetheless, the research is done. A few interesting ones out there. But as a safe system assessor, you really want to be going back to these sorts of things: speeds, energy, angles, weights of vehicles, and that sort of stuff, to give you an indication of how bad you think the crash event that you're predicting is going to be. Okay, so what we're going to do is a little exercise now. I'll spend some time explaining this exercise to you, and then I'll give you a good maybe 5 minutes or so to have a think about it, and also you have a stretch and fill up your water. So the exercise involves this intersection here. We've got an arterial highway. It's carrying 20,000 vehicles per day. It's got a speed limit of 70 km/h. Got a side road here, which is carrying 2,000 vehicles a day, and it's got a default 50 km/h speed limit. We've got, what else we've got here? We've got a shared path here. This is a bus stop. It's all residential. There's a school down the road, about 400 meters down the road, 300 meters, 400 meters down the road. These are two-way service roads. This is like a drainage structure. Drains out that way. Yeah, I'll show you sort of from the ground level a couple of photos. There you go. See decent volume of traffic there. You can see the service roads out here. It's got some trees, got lighting. That's the bus stop over there that we were pointing out. A bit of a median there, right turn lanes, keep clear markings there. That's looking from the other direction there. So over here you can see the shared path. There's the drainage structure thing. So the task you've got is that we want death and serious injury removed at this location going forward. Now, you've got a budget of $3 million to do that. You can't close off the intersection. Now, I know you wanted to do that because that was sort of one of those early principles. Can you have less intersections? Fortunately, we've done the community consultation and you can't do that. In fact, we have to have vehicles able to access that from all directions. So they've got to be able to exit right, exit left. They've got to enter from the top and the bottom of the screen there. Third sort of constraint or rule is that you are operating in the current political organizational framework that you are currently operating in. So if you're proposing something quite extreme, I want a little bit of an idea of how you might navigate that through your approval system and get the community on board and those sorts of things. So what I'm going to ask you to do is spend a little time having a think about that, and then write in your ideas into the chat. And for each thing you're proposing, I want you to categorize those into it is going to affect the exposure to crashes, or the likelihood of crashes, or the severity of crashes, or maybe a combination. So this is part of the practicing of us categorizing interventions into their effect, what they're affecting in terms of exposure, likelihood, and severity. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't know how much things cost, that's okay. I will be your instant cost estimator tool. So you can simply just write into the chat cost of, or just put a dollar figure question mark, and then say, I don't know, grade separation or flyover. And I'll say flyover will cost $38 million. It's out of your budget. But you may have other questions to ask around different treatments or different things you want to do, and how much that costs. Or if you've got a bit of an idea yourself, that the point of the exercise is not to get the cost estimation accurate. The point of the exercise is to think through what treatments could we implement, and do they influence the exposure, the likelihood, or the severity of crashes at this location. Do we have any questions about this site? I've given you some traffic volumes there. I've given you some information about what's around there. Usually at this point, somebody wants to know the crash history. Nobody's asked me that yet, but I will tell you the crash history. Not that, well, crash history, it's always still worth looking at crash history, but I'm less and less driven by crash history these days, because we can have areas that don't have crash history, but still present a significant risk. It's just that risk hasn't presented itself in death and serious injury yet. But anyway, it does still provide us some valuable intel. So let's have a look at this. There have been 6 serious injury crashes, no fatalities at this location in the past 5 years, but 6 serious injury crashes have all been passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle crashes. Sorry, no, 5 of them have. 1 was a motorcyclist. And they were right turn against and right out. So vehicle, that crash and that crash. They were serious injuries, and then we had a couple of minor incidents out here. So that's the crash history for those who are interested. Any more questions? Any questions at all, actually? So let me recap there. You are required to have a think about the intersection. You have $3 million to try to eliminate or get us as close to elimination of death and serious injury at this intersection as we possibly can. You can't close the intersection, and yeah, you're sort of operating in your current political, community, organizational framework that you're currently in. So have a think about that. I'm going to give you 4 minutes to have a go at this. And pop it into the chat. What is the sight distance? It's a very good question. You suppose you could calculate it on a 70K road, but sight distances are currently met in all directions. But I would be interested if they weren't. Well, I'll tell you that now. If there was something that was impeding the sight distance and that was to be removed to open up sight lines, that would change the likelihood of crashes. That would be a likelihood factor. All right. I will leave you to it, but do type into the chat if you want some cost estimation or you have any questions about the site. But otherwise, the next thing I hope to see is some ideas and those categorized. You just put a bracket E or a bracket L or a bracket S afterwards. Questions coming here. Is a multi-lane roundabout within the budget? What about putting traffic lights? So a multi-lane roundabout to meet the Australia's Guide to Road Design Part 4B? 4B? Yeah, I think it must be 4B. Will cost you $8 million out of budget. It's a very large thing there, so you have to look for something smaller than that. A set of traffic signals will cost you $2.4 million at this site. Yeah, so signals, $2.4 million. Is that somebody asking a cost of a speed zone review? Go with a speed zone review. It can cost $50,000 for the time and the effort, and then potentially, if there are any changes associated with signs, and logging those in the. I'm trying to remember what New South Wales' speed zoning system is called. It's escaping me. Somebody else. Speedlink, that's it. And Jamie wants that 50 grand. He'd be a millionaire by now if he got one for every speed zone review he did. But lots of your time goes into it, though, I'm sure. All right, I'll leave you to have a think about that. I suppose my speed zone review included any changes that resulted, and all of the periphery works, and of course the accounting for your time in documentation and review and site and everything like that. All right, keep thinking and pop your ideas in once you come up with them. Now remember, exposure likelihood and severity on your ideas, and you can do multiple things if you want. Duncan's asked a wonderful question there. Is there? I might come back to that one, Duncan. Is there opportunity to co-locate shared path and culvert structure? The drainage structure. So interesting one to have a think about. We'll ask you a question back on that, Duncan. Would that impact on exposure, likelihood, or severity of crashes? Okay, good. Thank you for your answer there, Duncan. Correct on influencing the exposure to crashes, because we would have a less number of pedestrians exposed to the crashes. But let's give it a minute. Let others pop their ideas in, and as I said, have a stretch, and we'll get back into it shortly. Okay, I'll give it another 30 seconds for anybody else to put their ideas in. I'm seeing some really good thinking going on here. I'm obviously very experienced traffic engineers and road designers, road managers. Some good thinking in there. Okay. Wow. This is some really good stuff. So thank you, everybody, for having a bit of a think about it. I'm going to read through and comment on a few of the comments that came in. I won't be able to get through all of them, but I'll utilize some of the comments as I show a few slides going forward. But remarkable one, I suppose, in a sense, or just shows that you can all. There's a lot of you that want traffic control signals, and that's probably an indication that you have a good understanding. A lot of you have a good understanding immediately of unbalanced flow, appropriateness of the signals of these locations, the costs, and you fairly quickly came to the conclusion that that would be a good outcome from a lot of perspectives at this location and would reduce the likelihood of crashes. Now, I noticed there was a variety of things people put in there in terms of exposure, likelihood, and severity for the traffic control signals. So in a safe system assessment and with safe system thinking, we attribute traffic signals to likelihood and likelihood only. Now, I know some of you are probably saying, oh, but you know, some crashes will happen at lower speed, people will brake, then there'll be a crash. Yes, but what we are doing is factoring in those higher speed crashes that still happen at traffic signals, running red lights, and those sorts of crashes. Exposure is simply the number of vehicles going through there. Now, if you have some traffic modeling that shows putting signals in there is going to alter the volume of traffic, then you've got a justification for talking about changing exposure. But the fact that there's a red light that says stop, that then we don't say that they're not exposed to crashes because we know that there are still crashes there. So I'll talk about this a little bit more. Signals are likelihood. We've got some ideas in there around moving the bus stop to a location not so much in the intersection as it is a bit away, as something that will reduce the likelihood of crashes. That's absolutely right. It is a likelihood one there. Sometimes people want to call that an exposure factor. Again, we wouldn't usually call it an exposure factor because there's still the crash. It's moved a little bit away, but it's still very much that vehicles are exposed to that crash. So then we had this interesting comment that came in about, I think it was from Duncan, using the drainage structure as an underpass. Now, I'm a big fan of doing that. This one's an interesting one. It's very long. And actually, I didn't answer the question, but it's not very deep at all. It looks like it is from here, but the idea of utilizing that it's often better when it's like a creek drainage structure or these sorts of things where you can utilize that and have your pedestrians and cyclists have that as a potential facility. I do take somebody's point on board though, and we do need to think about that, is that nobody likes walking through that dark underpass for personal safety reasons. So yes, you'd probably have to have a think about how that would be done with lighting and maybe even cutting an area there and some protection or something. So yeah, but I think the principle is an interesting one because it influences the exposure to crashes. I mean, with grades, it's a grade separation without having to pay for the grade separation. And probably a much more utilized one that if there was a large pedestrian structure to be built, DDA compliance, there'd be a long walk and then over and back. So it'd be quite a mammoth exercise, which a lot of people probably wouldn't use, because who likes walking up those stairs and those big ramps when you can just walk across the road? Some people will probably use it. But anyway, interesting thinking. Okay, we had a few people looking at the speeds and saying, could we change the speed limit to a speed limit review? Could we alter the speeds? That would influence the likelihood and severity of crashes. Now, that's right. It will influence the likelihood of crashes because people have more time to see something, to avoid, to react, to brake. And if the crash does happen, it's at lower speed. So we'll see a reduction in the severity of crashes as well. Some interesting little discussions about some things like roundabout, trying there. Is there another way we could get a roundabout in cheaper? Good questions to be asking. Some challenges there. I'll talk about those shortly. Some mention of raised platforms to slow vehicles. An interesting thought there in terms of the severity and potentially likelihood of crashes, but severity of crashes. Some people wanting to add some barriers in there to protect road users from falling into the culvert or hitting trees, or influencing the severity of crashes. That's correct, severity of crashes. Providing left turn lanes. So a bit of structure widening, utilizing some of this area for a dedicated left turn. Now that will be a likelihood factor there, reducing the likelihood of crashes, probably reducing the likelihood of rear end crashes, and maybe a little bit of help for some of our intersection style crashes there. We wanted to close the service roads. Now, interesting one, if those service roads were closed, I would probably, doing an assessment of this whole area under a safe system assessment, attribute that to likelihood of crashes. I can completely understand, though, how people would say it's an exposure to crash alteration, but that would really be if your assessment was in that sort of scope, because what we're seeing is there is these are the volumes we're interested in exposure. Volumes coming in and out of here. These are going to come out of here, and it's so minor compared to those volumes that essentially the volume of vehicles exposed to crashes is essentially the same. But can understand the exposure call on that one. Interesting question around a 40-kilometre school speed zone. Could that be put in place? And I think that's always an interesting question to ask. How far can you stretch your school speed zones? I mean, it's a wonderfully accepted speed zone, has some wider benefit, but a fair question to ask. Okay, well, thank you. First of all, thank you. Great ideas, great thinking. I want to use that as a platform to talk a bit about some of those treatments and their safe system alignment. And then I'll come back to this intersection and I'll show you a few things that happen. Traffic control signals were brought up by a lot of you, and you can immediately see that would be a treatment that would be consistent with those sorts of locations. Actually, right down the road about a kilometre, there's a set of traffic signals, so less than a kilometre. Signals are further down the road as well. So, but the traffic signals, and I must stress this, absolutely stress this, they are a likelihood reducing device. Well, they do a pretty good job. But we would generally give them about 45% reduction in crashes going from that giveaway to a set of traffic control signals like this. And they're going to reduce the likelihood of crashes. But they're not going to do anything for our severity of crashes, because we do have people going through red lights at high speed. intentionally or unintentionally. And exposure, as I talked about in the safe system, it's just the number of vehicles or the number of pedestrians or the number of cyclists, right? That is our exposure metric. Okay, and so the signals aren't going to change that unless it alters travel patterns. And as a safe system assessor, I don't make my own predictions on it. I ask, have you done any traffic modeling? Right? Give me that information, and that is what I was. If I'm not provided that, I'll just say it's going to remain as it is. Okay, so we're not going to alter the exposure. 45% or so reduction. Now, this is really interesting. And what I'm going to show you now is a heat map of death and serious injury for, where did I pick? Outer suburban Melbourne, this one is, but you can do the same for outer suburban Sydney. I should do Sydney, or any, any major population centre across Australia and New Zealand. You come out with pretty much the same, right? So this is, the hotter the spot, the more death and serious injury. So this is I think it took a 10-year death and serious injury, and then put the heat mapping software on that spatial location data. And what we see there, every one of the hotspots is a large signalised intersection. That's one even there. They are all signalised intersections. And in fact, if you take New South Wales top 100 intersections for death and serious injury, the majority of them are signalised intersections. The overwhelming majority are signalised intersections. That's interesting, isn't it? Now, the exposure is high because we have a lot of vehicles going through here. We also have all those other things that I talked about, the spike in risks, that crossing, people crossing the road there, challenges, all the conflict points, right? But there is this perception that a set of traffic signals is our sort of ultimate treatment until we can grade separate. The reality is, though, that there is a huge amount of death and serious injury at signalised intersections in New South Wales. So the comments come in, traffic signals could increase exposure as motorists feel safe in the signals. So really, I'm not sure. The exposure is such a tricky one in terms of the way we've used it in traffic analysis and road safety analysis in the past has been slightly different. The safe system assessment is about numbers. So if people feel safer and then are attracted to it, so like a latent demand, you build it, they all come, then absolutely, that's your alteration to the exposure. You've got more people crossing, you've got more the like. But again, you want to get that from traffic modeling or get somebody to do that prediction modeling for you in a safe system assessment rather than just going, oh, I reckon the pedestrians are going to go up threefold when they build this. Well, let's have a little bit more of a think about that. Where do we get this data for the hotspots? The Centre for Road Safety, if they still exist, do they, within Transport for New South Wales, publish your crash data by location, and you can simply utilise any of a raft of heat mapping softwares that are freely available. We use ArcGIS to do this, but you can just drop your data. You can literally download it from Centre for Road Safety's website or the crash stats, and then just drop it in. There's actually one that's a lot easier to use for heat mapping, Batch Geo. If you're looking for a mapping software, it's unbelievably easy these days. You literally get your Excel, download it, you put it in, and it figures out what's going on and just maps a lot of it. And the regional planning teams apparently can do that or have done that for you. So there you go. You've got resources at your fingertips. But back to this point. So interesting, isn't it? I mean, signals, not the be all and end all. And in fact, there's this, I had to chuckle Professor Jeremy Woolley who's doing the review into the National Road Safety Strategy and in years of big increases in the number of people killed and seriously injured and the like. He made a comment a lot along the lines of traffic signals are the biggest failure of traffic engineers. I was like, oh, wow, okay. And he's talking about it from a road safety perspective and the way it's played out. I mean, I don't think I think it's intentionally causing a little bit of trouble. But the idea, though, is that we kind of get to signals and we put mast arms and we put LEDs and we put fully controlled right turns, we put a red light speed camera, and we're just like, what else can we do? Like, they got to stop running the red lights. People have to stop that. Like, we can't make it any more obvious, but they keep running the red lights. Interestingly, with roundabouts, it's a bit of a different story. What we see, obviously, with roundabouts is people slow down. They look around. The angle of crashes, if they happen, is better. So for passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle, we see some great benefits, but we attribute almost all of that benefit to the severity of crashes. Okay, so crashes are still happening at roundabouts. They're just not as severe. So in terms of other facts, like we will talk about, I suppose, efficiency, traffic efficiency, and those sorts of things in a minute. I'm just reading why is it? Okay. Yes, prize. Somebody's identified I'm still wearing the same watch as I was from 15 years ago. So, Butler, Butler B. I'll have to work out who you are, but you get a prize. Billo. Easy as that to get a prize. You just need to ask. Yes, there's my calculator. Many a sight distance calculation done on that watch. So the roundabouts are pretty amazing, but they cost a lot, don't they? What did I say? $8 million or so at that site. And you know, look at the land take, big swathes of land here. Not the same site, obviously. And this is just a single lane roundabout. And why do you need that? Well, we've got to get a large vehicle around that. It's going to have a big swept park. And so we're, lots of money. And then there are, interesting traffic features, aren't there? I mean, the unbalanced flow of that intersection we were looking at is one. We've got a main drag, which has got the bulk of the vehicles. And if you have a side road, that may disrupt things. You may be able to meter the roundabout and get it to perform pretty well. By metering a roundabout, I mean to place traffic signals, for example, down here or something. So when the side road traffic banks up to a certain point, pop a loop in the road back there, you can have your traffic signals here, go to red for a little bit, flush out some of these vehicles, and then go back. That's also a nice little spot to have a pedestrian and cyclist crossing point, because pedestrians and cyclists have some trouble at roundabouts in terms of crossing and the like. So you can do little tweaks and the like on that to try to retain that. But do they need to cost as much? Could we do little roundabouts, mini style roundabouts? Again, a very different environment, isn't it? Very different road environment. This is a local street. This is in the UK. But there you go. A little bit of a paint. Okay, they've done a little splitter island, so a little bit of infrastructure, but it's not much. Now, interestingly, one of the big reasons why these actually perform pretty well from a road safety perspective, one of the big reasons is nobody approaching this intersection believes they have ultimate priority. So every vehicle approaching is, bracing themselves or at least looking around to see if they have to give way. This is sort of the UK equivalent of the four-way stop from the US. So the perception of ultimate priority causes us a bit of trouble because it's that speed and people are somewhat switched off as they're driving. And so then when something happens, they're not alert or the speeds are high and we've got bad issues. So disrupting that, continual priority is an interesting one. I really, and I see a lot of merit to a four-way stop or a mini roundabouts like this, and I'd like to disrupt that. And I think there's one in, is there a four-way stop in Newcastle? Somebody might be able to tell me. I have a vague recollection of one. But anyway, it's interesting thinking in disrupting that ultimate priority. Let me just have a look at the chat. Oh, yes, okay, you've got a few there. Okay, this is good. Yeah, good. Don't think you missed any wallies there. So some really good points about correct roundabout design, and I'll come back to that. Roundabout design is very important to achieve these safety benefits we're talking about. And one of the design functions that we're very interested in for roundabouts, as some of you will know, will be entry speeds, and we're quite interested in those entry speeds. One way in these smaller roundabouts, the like, to try to influence entry speeds can be things like raised platforms or features to slow down. A lot of jurisdictions use a reverse curve into a roundabout to slow vehicles down. That's basically a chicane for those who, so you sort of chicane drivers in on the approach. I know New South Wales, I think, used to do that and went out of favour a little bit at recent times. But let's talk about those roundabouts a little bit more and why we were seeing such benefits. So here's a conflict point diagram. A conflict point being literally a way you can crash there, and a dot being that way. Now this is passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle, but less conflict points at roundabouts than traffic signals or give way control. We have that angle of crash improve. There's more bounce off in a roundabout crash than a signalized intersection crash in a lot of the conflict point. And also, when there is a roundabout there's this amazing ability by the infrastructure to wake up drivers. Drivers are driving, unfortunately, in all states of consciousness. Some are, some are nice and alert. Some are thinking about, the fight they had with their partner, or have done a double shift and then a drive into their brother's wedding, or a little bit drug affected, alcohol affected. We don't want people driving in those states, but I'll tell you now, there is a huge amount of that happening, and it's going to continue to happen. Sure, we're working on other enforcement and other techniques to try to minimize that, but right, the infrastructure though wakes people up. It brings them back to reality. They're half asleep, they approach an intersection, a roundabout, and they're back to it. They look around, they slow down. Huge wins for road safety. So it's interesting though that we have roundabouts and then the traffic volume builds and they come a little bit inefficient. They can't get the vehicles through, so they've got two lanes even, and they can't get the vehicles through your count of a set of traffic signals. And so the traffic operations team does a wonderful little business case and it says, yep, we can improve the traffic efficiency by this much by removing that roundabout and replacing it with traffic signals. And we'll go from level service C to level service A, or D to B, or whatever it is. And here's how much saving travel time we'll get through that area, and it's stamped approved, and off it goes. And in fact, huge number of congestion easing programs or other freight efficiency programs you'll see, and they're ripping out roundabouts. Now, actually, I'm going to stop sharing for a second, see if I can just quickly grab a document that I took from my time in the Victorian government. Here it is. So I keep it on my desktop as a little reminder of something. So this was, let me give you the background of it. I was in the road safety department, engineering, senior engineer there, and there was the biggest ever congestion easing program. It was Keep Melbourne Moving, it's called. Massive, and it was just out of suburban, rip roundabouts out and replaced with traffic signals. And so all those projects were coming into our area and piling up on my desk for road safety reviews. And what they were expecting was a check of the, the phasing, the alignment of the crossing points, the, correct, mast arms or joint use mast arms or whatever it is, all of that sort of checks and stuff. But so we did that. My colleague and I, we did that. But then we started producing this memo, and I'll just share my screen and show you because, as I say, I kept a copy. We started producing this memo. So hopefully you're seeing that on the screen. And so this is the template of it. Intro from the road safety department, and here we go. So the road safety department has analysed this project as increasing crashes as follows. Project life, 20 years. Number of deaths attributed to this project, 2.3. Put little people there to remind them these are people we're talking about. Number of serious injuries, 12.6. Statement of acceptance. The above road trauma is accepted by, and then a spot for the regional manager or regional director to sign that off. So they got a design review, road safety report, and they got this memo on the top of it sent back to the region. Now, I would imagine, you would imagine how that was received. Not very well. Did we get any signed and sent back to us? Never. Did we get a stern talking to from our executive director? Yes, we certainly did. And it was along the lines of, we as a road authority have a responsibility to consider, it's balancing, we've got to balance, we've got to get improvements, efficiency, people's lives, they can't be sitting in traffic the whole time, we're going to move the system around, all the usual stuff. And we were very aware of it, intentionally stirring the pot a bit with this. But to a degree, you have to say, okay, are we willing to trade off human health and life to get a few more seconds per vehicle out of that intersection? And if the decision by our community is yes, then somebody needs to sign that off and say that that's what we're going to do. And when you put it in black and white like that, people get very, very touchy about it. But the one thing I'd say, though, is these days, a safe system assessment does sort of the same thing in a much more friendly way to a degree, a more palatable way, and probably more of a way that people are willing to keep on a file and actually, have there. Because we see that sort of, is this going to make things worse? Right, where was I? I better share my other slides now. Back to that, yeah, that's where we're at. Yeah, so so that BCR analysis that you could do. I mean, improving traffic efficiency is always an amazing BCR benefit because of those number of vehicles and those small improvements in throughput, in time saving, add up to massive improvements for economic productivity. To a degree, I question that economic analysis because at an individual level, is that ever enough to increase productivity? But a pure economist would say, well, that's not logical. You add it up. That's how you do it. Anyway. So roundabouts are pretty great, but traffic signals provide us with lots of other benefits as well. And they provide often better facilities for pedestrians and cyclists. Pedestrians feel much more comfortable crossing a traffic signals. And from a pure safety perspective, they don't get as much benefit as people tend to believe, due to the high speeds of red light runners and turners over them and those sorts of things. Nonetheless, it's not great at roundabouts either. So let me just check the questions and comments here. Yeah, bit of internal discussion, that's good. But not all roundabouts are the same. Two-lane roundabouts don't tend to operate as effectively as single-lane roundabouts. But there are things available called turbo roundabouts, which are an interesting concept of a two-lane roundabout that pretty much performs as well from a safety perspective as a one-lane roundabout. So you're getting increased capacity with the safety features. Here's just a bit of radius of roundabout and through speed. Speed's pretty good proxy for safety in most scenarios, but you can see there as the radius gets bigger, but the turbo roundabout operates pretty much like that single way. So turbo roundabout, for those who don't know what that is, it's a roundabout, two-lane roundabout. You've got a raised separator on the approach and through the roundabout, which essentially channelizes vehicles into their turn lanes or their through lane. There's another example of a turbo, and raise there, raise through there. So, you want to go right, you get in there, and you go. Gee, look at, I love this. Look at conflict happening there. Look at the angle of conflict. Beautiful, beautiful angle of conflict. And we know this white vehicle is going to be going slow, aren't they? When they've come in and they've had to go around. It's a sort of radial style roundabout. You can tell it's European from its radial nature, meaning that it's sort of in, well, hang on, it's sort of in and then around rather than that the tangential way that we would usually do those roundabouts. And here's another turbo roundabout. And I put this up for a couple of reasons. One, it's awesome and like fun just to look at it, isn't it? Two is the immense size of it, and you go, wow, that would cost a bomb. That would be amazing. And then the third one is a little story about a Dutch engineer that we brought over to. We were doing some workshops on cyclists at roundabouts, and I happened to show this to the Dutch engineer because this is in the Netherlands. I flipped it from right-hand drive to left-hand drive because it would boggle our minds if it was right-hand drive as well as the way it is. But it's a signalized turbo roundabout, two large high-speed arterials crossing. And I said, this is just fascinating. Here in Australia, we would have that as a large high-speed signalized intersection or potentially a grade separation with the high volumes they were talking. And I said, but probably a signalized intersection in that sort of similar road environment. And the Dutch engineer goes, said, with raised safety platforms. I said, no, probably not. This was back a while back. I said, no, definitely not, actually. But he's like, well, what about all the death and serious injury to your community? And really just could not boggle his mind. It boggled his mind. He could not fathom the idea that you would possibly operate a signalized intersection with speeds around the 70 or 80 kilometre per hour mark, because he knew that it's going to kill and seriously injure your community. So they'd rather, they would rather take the land and do this sort of thing. But we're advancing in an interesting way now, where there is a lot more questioning of those speeds and the energy through large signalization. So how do we keep the capacity that we want through there and maintain some of those features of the roundabout that we know improve safety so dramatically? And the people are looking at things like cut-through roundabouts, squircles, which is a sort of square circle style roundabout where you have the vehicles have the ability to sort of, store and signalize, but yet the bullet vehicles coming through, they change angles. So they've got something to wake them up. They've got better conflict angles, reduce speed through the intersection. So I think there's a lot of innovating we can continue to do around intersections, and it's all around the management of energy now, right? I think we can continue to look for things to do to reduce the likelihood of crashes, but we really need to get in the game of energy management. Now, this one, it hasn't been built. It's a good artistic impression. This one, it does look like it's really there. It hasn't been built yet. People are a little bit freaked out, the design committees and the like. I personally think that if you're at ground level, this would be far more simple than it looks from up here. It looks very scary from up here. But what about the idea of slowing vehicles down using vertical deflection? So speed platforms. Now, Brad mentioned that. Oh, sorry, it's somebody says, calling them spiral roundabouts for the turbo roundabouts. Yeah, so we do use an Alberta line marking in Australia for a lot of our roundabouts, which has the same line marking configuration as a turbo roundabout or a spiral roundabout. It's just that those have the actual physical raised separators on the Alberta line marking that we'd use. Vertical deflection. Now, this is interesting. Raised safety platforms, slowing vehicles utilizing that vertical deflection. Now, when I started as a design engineer back in the day, if I had suggested to do vertical deflection, something raised on a major arterial with freight buses, 20,000 plus vehicles a day, I've been told to sit in the corner and think about what I just said. It'd be outrageous. But we've progressed a lot from there. And as was mentioned, a lot of jurisdictions are now starting to investigate this and implement things, which is not like an urban speed hump. It's a shallower platform, it's raised, and it's designed to slow vehicles down a bit and not have too much disruption to larger vehicles and the like. And that's actually what they planned for that intersection you were looking at. So they came to the conclusion that a lot of you quickly came to, in that traffic control signals were a good control feature at that location. But then they went through a little bit of that journey that I was talking about to say, well, yeah, we know it's going to reduce the likelihood of crashes by a bit, but we're going to have a lot of residual death and serious injury. So I wonder if there's anything that could be done to reduce the severity of crashes, and started looking at, can we do some raised things? Could we look at, could we lower the speed limit significantly? That would be unpalatable. Community, we see it as revenue raising. Could we look at ways that we could get some operating speeds down without having to do that? And then they looked at this. Now, interestingly, they've got this on this leg and over here, but they didn't raise the whole intersection, and they don't have any on here. You can't see this. What? That's because this is the bullet vehicle, and this is the bullet vehicle. These ones coming in and out, they're target vehicles. They're the ones that are going to get the damage. And their primary thing that they were concerned with, from the crash history, but also what they know about the site, the number of, they were primarily concerned with bullet vehicle crashing with vehicle coming out and going in at fairly close to a right angle. So what speed do you think they designed the platforms for? What speed were they aiming at? Just pop that in the chat. I'll give a prize to the first person who pops that in. Any ideas? What's design speed? Lewis is there with a 50. Now, 50, remember, is a right angle speed passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle. I do like a lot of your other comments, because you're probably thinking about some of the pedestrian, vulnerable road user, maybe thinking also if you get it down to about a 40, then it might it'd be under that 50, but the 50 was the critical speed. And remember, this is our major highway. It's carrying all the vehicles and the freight and everything, and disruption of that, they didn't want to disrupt it too much, and so it's a bit of a balance. Anyway, that's what they came up with, and there you go, they built it. Okay, and you can see there they used advisory speeds of 50. Interesting, advisory speeds are so much more palatable to the community than speed limits. So if you give them the decision to slow down off their own, they can't claim revenue raising, can they? Because you didn't change the speed limit. There's another picture of it. In this case, they used yellow line marking to try to not have people think it was a pedestrian crossing facility as well, but that was just a little design tweak at the end. I was out there doing some, with a colleague doing the post-opening audit of it and took a few photos. And this was an interesting photo. I love this photo because we've got a vehicle braking in the approach to the green lights. So they've got priority, but we disrupted their sleeping or whatever they were doing at the wheel, and it came back and slowed down and navigated the intersection. Some people get really pissed off about this. They're like, oh, it's so inefficient, and blah, 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 all of that. But if it was a roundabout, we wouldn't be jumping up and down. People would be slowing down and navigate the roundabout. They'd speed up again. Everybody's completely happy with it. It's just we're not used to this. We haven't seen this as much. But we're alerting drivers, slowing drivers at a high risk conflict point. Another advantage from one of the evaluations was around the dilemma zone and the tightening of the dilemma zone. So the dilemma zone, for those who don't know that term, is the point in time and space when a vehicle approaching the intersection is in the dilemma of, do I put the foot down and go, or do I brake? I'm sure you've been in the dilemma zone. It's a you find yourself there, and you're it's up there with best naming of a road infrastructure thing. I just love it, dilemma zone. The other one I love is trap lane. Trap lane. Whoever named that should get a prize as well. But dilemma zone. So yeah, it's a real tightening of the dilemma zone because a vehicle approaching is just far more likely to hit the brakes because they have to navigate a platform, a vertical deflection, and so we'll take the option to stop rather than. So one of the and sorry, just before I jump off this, we're now hitting up both, and this is awesome because we are really doing a good job in reducing the likelihood through the traffic signal, but we've reduced the severity by reducing the speed of vehicles through there. And so what I'm really happy with now is that in Victoria and New South Wales is coming along, Queensland certainly in this as well, is you have to do a safe system assessment if you're going to do an infrastructure project like this. And yet a safe system assessment is going to have to ensure that we bring the energies back within tolerable levels. And this one made me happy because I didn't really have any involvement in it until, well, I did a post-opening safety audit again with a colleague. But the whole planning design process went through to rip out a roundabout on a road here with 58,000 vehicles, 56,000 vehicles, immense amount of vehicles a day, bus route, heavy vehicle route. This one's got about 36,000 vehicles a day. Side road, ripped the roundabout out because, as you would imagine, wasn't performing that well, at least during peak periods. Put in a set of traffic signals and, as you can see there, raised the lot of it to try to bring it within tolerable speeds and keep the energies down. So I'm not particularly saying that raised safety platforms are the be all and end all, I think they're pretty awesome, but I love the thinking that now we're saying, well, we're going to reduce the energy through these signalized intersections because humans make mistakes and they run that. They run that red light intentionally or unintentionally. We need to start managing that. There's a couple of Victorian road design notes. There's now an Austroads document, road safety platforms, which I will put into Moodle for you all. I don't have a picture of it on screen, but it's a good Austroads document, and it's exciting. And I'm really looking forward to New South Wales jumping on to some road safety platforms. New Zealand's going nuts. Victoria's going nuts with them. Queensland's sort of prodding them and having a look at them and designing things and the like. But I haven't heard much out of New South Wales. Let me just pause there before I have a quick chat about this one. Mast arm from centre. Yeah, I'm not sure. So we can come back and look. Oh yeah, there you go. Mast arm from the centre is an interesting one, isn't it? Don't use mast arm there. Boom. Hook it onto the lighting. Just a quick one on this. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time talking this one because I need some time to tell you about the assignment you're going to do at the end of this session. But just another one, I think, which is a great example of people really utilising the safe system assessment framework and that thinking around severity of crashes and not settling. This is a high-speed intersection, 100 kilometre per hour in each direction. They reduced one of them to 80 at one point due to sort of crashes or due to crashes. That's the arterial road, goes sort of that way. This is a Telstra or telecommunication exchange building. The land, the land goes, private property goes right up the, these areas. So there's a lot of challenges there. They did say we want a roundabout here because we know roundabouts are good to slow vehicles down and all of that. But gee, it's going to cost us a lot of money because it's going to have to be massive, and in this case, they wanted to do reverse curves, which you guys probably wouldn't want to do, but reverse curves taking up lots of land. And moving this thing was going to cost like $1.5 million in its own right or something like that. So the cost was just crazy. And so they then looked at options and said, oh, okay, well, we could do, how about we do a right turn lane? We'll just do a right turn lane and we'll do some warning signs. And that gets safe system assessed. You're going to drop the likelihood of crashes a little bit. You're doing nothing for severity of crashes. Exposure is the same. You get some benefit. But we're not going to, virtually eliminate death and serious injury here by doing that. And so they sort of revisited, went back to the drawing board and said, well, what about we do that smaller roundabout that we're talking about? What about a smaller roundabout? Little roundabout there, big concrete apron because we're going to have some trouble with heavy vehicles getting around there. So they'll need to track over something. How do we slow vehicles on the approach? We've got a small roundabout, and I think it was Brad mentioned there earlier that you've got to be careful with your roundabout design because you're not going to get the safety benefits if they're not designed well. How do we get some of those design elements that are super important for roundabouts, but not take up as much land? How do we do it cheaper? And they went again with some raised platforms to slow vehicles on the approach, and then they went with this interesting roundabout arrangement. And again, that one got built, and I love this as another example of lower cost, but getting the same, output in terms of reduction in death and serious injury. So there you go. You've got shallow raised platforms, and then you've got, a little hard to see, you've got roundabout, that's the actual raised part of it. The rest of it is concrete apron. And so the large vehicles really track, take up a lot of that, and they'll come through. So I've just finished working with a colleague writing the road design guidelines for compact roundabouts, we call these. So if anybody's interested in that, I can flick that over. A lot of design considerations in how you do this. I'm sure some of you who have designed roundabouts or been involved in that are saying, whoa, where are you putting your lighting, and how are you, how does this work with some of the basic design principles of roundabouts? But we're able to get some pretty good performance out of this. Is performing beautifully, by the way, and cost under half of what the full size one was going to cost. And this was like the first one, so it cost even more because it was about 50 design review reports and risk assessment workshops, and you name it. It was it's quite the adventure. Truck stability analysis, modeling, and all sorts of things. Quiz time. Let me pop up a poll here. Hopefully I can find it. Module 2, poll 1. Just a quick question here. True, hopefully that's popped up on your screen. True or false? Traffic signals are not safe system. True, false, or unintelligible question? Unintelligible question meaning that doesn't make any sense. Ken, what are you talking about? The question does not make sense. I'll let you have a vote on that. Remember, you are not being marked on this. We can't even tell who says what. So just pop something in. And I'll just check the chat, see if I've missed anything. No, doing well. Another 5 seconds. I've nearly got everybody now. All right, here we go. Let's see what people are saying. So we had a few of you say true, a few of you, or most of you say false, and a few of you say unintelligible questions. Well, it was a tricky question, I'll give you that, because I gave you no context. So if the context was, a particular road environment, a particular speed, and the traffic signals as a way to control probably wouldn't have great alignment with safe system principles. So I can see some of you might have thought that in the truth. I like the fact that a lot of you are saying false, because I really believe that it's not the traffic signals themselves, traffic control signals themselves. I mean, it's the context of where they're put and what's going on and everything around that. So unintelligible is probably the way to go, because there are too many unknown variables, and it really hasn't, it's not the best worded question. And the second issue with this question is, we don't really talk about it is safe system or it's not safe system. We know that safe system is a spectrum. Things are aligned highly with safe system principles or not so highly with safe system principles. So that would be another one that I'd like a little bit of clarity on that. So with some more context, any of true or false could have been right, but I would opt with false or unintelligible on that one. Thank you. Okay. Let's have a little discussion around lane departure, crashes, and some safe system alignment, and then they'll introduce you to the exercise. And I'll probably, hopefully, give you a bit of time to do your quiz and have a think about your assignment. Lane departure. Okay. We had a good chat there about intersections and the principles for intersections. Here we've got a long, straight road, many hundreds of thousands of kilometres of this looking stuff out there in regional New South Wales and other areas. One lane in each direction, maybe overtaking lane, separated by white line, bit of sealed shoulder, and then a bit of bit of offset to some vegetation or some farmland, the occasional minor intersection. Without knowing much more about this road, it goes on for about 400 kilometers like this, maybe 300 kilometers like this. What type of crashes do you think might be happening along this road? What are sort of the dominant crashes we're seeing? Pop any ideas into the chat. Run off road and head on, coming in strong, and absolutely. Interestingly, you're probably your point where it's going to tick over from more runoff roads to more head-ons is around the 5,000 to 6,000 vehicles a day is where you'll get more. When you go above 6,000, there'll be more head-on crashes. So it'll be slightly traffic volume related there. But there you go. I mean, we know that. We know the issue. We know people are falling asleep. And a lot of you saying fatigue in there as a big reason why they're leaving their lane. Falling asleep, leaving their lane, and having those crashes. The mechanics of that crash is quite interesting, and I suppose the most common, is that the driver falls asleep or is drifting and drifts off the road to the left to start. Probably because the road's got a slight, bit of angle that way to drain some water off. This is on the fairly straight roads that I'm talking about. Drift off to the left, wake up in the roadside. And then there is just chaos, because as you would imagine, if you sort of come back to consciousness and you are in the roadside, the first reaction is to pull the wheel back, hit the brake and pull the wheel back to get on the road. And that generates a yawing. A yawing is the side to side of a vehicle. So then the vehicle starts to yaw, and then it may yaw and go to the other side of the road or have a head on. So it started as a drift off left, but it quickly becomes a yaw to the right. Could be a run off road to the right. Could be a double yaw, which would be and then try to gain control again and go back the other way. It's quite chaotic after that first event. And we know that with those trees and power poles and those point source hazards, we know that the side of the vehicle is really not well placed. And I've mentioned that a couple of times. This is the old ANCAP test, the 29 km/h one. As I said, it went up to 32 km/h last year as the test. Still very low, isn't it? Low speed for what we can tolerate there. This was estimated at 60 km/h strike with a power pole, just to show you the absolute, like the violence of a crash like this. If I can find the energy involved in that, the kinetic energy is huge. It's about 60. So some of you will be, the ones that have to do those fatality investigations and the like, and you'll know that, vehicles hitting trees at 100, 110, 120 kilometers an hour are obliterated. They're ripped in half. These are unbelievable. And so the idea then of just clearing out our poles and our trees becomes a pretty good prospect. But I again want to point out some of the limitations we have with them. So this is clear zone. Oops. This is clear zone down the bottom, right? Now, many of you know clear zone being, an area from the edge line free of fixed hazards. And here we've got run-off-road casualty crashes per 100 million VKT. I'll give a prize. Person who can tell me what VKT stands for. First person to do that. This is almost like who can type fastest and who has the quickest internet. It looks like Brad. Yep, Brad, you're in there. Vehicle kilometers traveled. That's right, VKT. So that's your measure. How many vehicles and how many kilometers are being traveled. You can do a like-for-like comparison between a high-volume road and a low-volume road based on putting it all back to crash rates per VKT. That's your equal playing field in that sense. So anyway, but the point being that you can see here that as you create clear zones, you reduce run-off road crash rates, but it sort of asymptotes out around the 4 casualty crashes per 100 million VKT. Now, there's a lot of recent research on this and more delving into it. But what we've discovered with clear zones from all of that research is that they're not necessarily a safe place to be. Vehicles are going well beyond what we have as documented clear zones under different sort of clear zone graphs and the like. And they're rolling over within the clear zone. So I talked about the vehicle yawing, sliding side to side in the roadside, and it will roll in that space. And we get not as severe a crash, but we have death, but a lot of spinal injuries and the like associated with rollover crashes. Now, if I was running this session 10, 15 years ago, I would say that's the best we've got is to clear it out, clear free of hazards. But now I say we actually have amazing barrier technology. It used to be that putting a G4, like a W-beam system in, came with its own risk, right? So you go, well, putting a hazard, is it a lesser hazard? A flexible barrier system these days is an incredible safety device. And a flexible barrier system offset from edge line between 4 and 6 meters is a superior safety device compared to a clear zone of 9, 12 meters. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? The other thing is that when, at least on brownfield sites, when are we actually able to get these clear zones? I mean, we can't chop down trees anymore because native vegetation, and we don't really want to, do we? We don't just chop down trees. I mean, there was a great safety benefit for doing it at some point because we didn't have anything else. But now we're at a point where the barriers are going to be better safety outcome. You don't have to chop those trees down and the costs and those sort of things. So we're in this real win with barriers, flexible barrier systems, continuous barrier systems. You do get your most bang for your buck in your first 4 to 5 meters of clear zone. And you'll see for those who have read or been involved with the most recent Australia's Guide to Road Design Part 6, which is roadside hazards and barriers, that the idea of clear zones has gone. Jurisdictions have moved away from clear zone, and they're now operating in a very sort of different way of thinking. Yeah, and so a really good point there that's come up from Brad is, and I did say flexible barriers, and people still often think that of wire rope is the only flexible barrier system, but absolutely not. As Brad said there's wonderful flexible W-beam systems, and there's a number of New South Wales approved ones. You've got Ram Shield, you've got Easy Guard, High Containment, you've got Century Barrier. These are flexible W-beam systems, which give you some advantage in the sense of whole of life cost from maintenance strikes. You can put motorcycle underrun protection on them, rub rails, and they're just an amazing bits of engineering. Wonderful end terminals for them as well. So no longer are we building roads like this. So you're seeing sort of, when you build these big bypasses and these huge new roads, we're not going to be seeing these massive wide cross sections, or if we are, we're going to see continuous barrier rolled out with them, hopefully, because that's what the safe system assessment will be saying. You're going to get better bang for your buck. And so sort of the Princess Highway upgrades you're seeing, and they have safe system assessments for those going on, which is wonderful to see. We'll see continuous barrier systems for these high volume roads. And it's good because, I mean, it's absolutely just devastating to see when billions of dollars have been spent and a road like this pretty much is built. And, within months of it opening, a vehicle goes across the center line, strikes another vehicle, kills a family and the driver as well. I mean, imagine that if it was a rail and within months of it opening, that 5 or 6 people were killed after a multi-billion-dollar rail project. The outrage that it'd be shut down until, every bit of it was fixed, but we just have that because crashes happen all the time and somebody was at fault and they weren't in the control of the vehicle. There's less sort of outrage. I mean, there is outrage, but anyway, that's sort of the new way to design is slightly different. Have a look at Part 6. I don't have time to go through that. There's some good Austroads webinars. We run some barrier training, which some of you might have come to our barrier training, where we're now teaching the new Part 6 way of doing it. New South Wales is just trying to get their head around NRRIT scores and what you're going to set as state scores and things like that. But we'll see what comes out. We're just having a look at a comment here. Unfortunately, some of our barriers hit damage for 6 months after being hit, and the budget to maintain them is less and less over the years. Yes, that is unfortunate. Certainly, some of those flexible W-beam systems are much better on a secondary hit, so minor nuisance hits don't disable the whole system. It still functions pretty well, but I agree, it's an ongoing challenge, and we roll more and more capital infrastructure out, and the maintenance budgets go down and down, but something's got to give, doesn't it? There we go, in time. Okay. Here's a real just rough schematic of high safe system alignment for cross sections and down to low. And you see the barrier systems are so important for these cross sections to create that bumper bowling of roads where people are going to leave their lane, but we're going to try to contain them all the way down to sort of what we see as a lot of sort of standard cross sections we have out there for a lot of the road network operating at high speeds. And here are some of your New South Wales cross sections, which get tweaked. And I admit I haven't checked, but I have got the most recent ones. But you've got lots of different ones, which are really pointing you to more of these narrowed cross sections. This is a 4-star road, so under an OSRAP, like, the way your fridge or your washing machine gets a star rating for energy efficiency, we star rate roads in a similar fashion. We use OSRAP. So our company does quite a bit of star rating of roads or new proposed designs or the like. This is a 4-star road with these big clear zones and big wide median. This is a 5-star road with a central barrier and outer barriers. And you can see different cross sections with different star ratings. It's a 1-star road operating at 100 kilometres an hour with centre line, edge line, and shoulders. So that shows you there. A lot of the road network probably sits at a 1-star. You've got OSRAP star rating for your state road network, so it's available to you to see where you're at. How we roll this barrier out is important, and I've made my fair share of mistakes, and I try to tell other people not to make the same mistakes. Continuous barrier systems at a 1-2 metre offset for long lengths it does a really good job in reducing road trauma. But the public gets really annoyed. They really hate it when you don't provide those areas that they can pull over if their vehicle breaks down, or the kid throws up in the back, or they need to, stop for one reason or another, and they have to, like this vehicle, hang into the live traffic lane. So just be careful with the design of that. And I don't have time to go into all the design parameters, thinking about what barrier type and what's your offset, what's your length, how do you like the need calculations and all of that sort of stuff. But just be aware of how road users are going to use this and how they're going to feel. This barrier, very interestingly, huge savings in death or serious injury, but huge outrage from the community as well. And I'll just finish on this one, which is not a particular, I have nothing to do with this product, but the thinking again to me is wonderful. And it's called a Raptor cushion. A Raptor cushion looks like this. It wraps around a utility pole, and it's a bit of absorption of energy. It's kind of got a honeycomb center, and it crushes a bit. But that's not really its genius. Its genius is that when a vehicle strikes it, because of those pointed in the configuration of it, it rotates, okay? And it pushes the vehicle along. Kind of like martial arts, where the punch, the energy of the punch is moved past. I've never done martial arts in my life, but I watched the Karate Kid. But, it's this rotational, it moves it and rotates it and moves the vehicle along so it doesn't abruptly stop. And that's just to me, I just like wonderful thinking about energy and the management of energy in these crashes. So I just thought I'd put it out there. And there's one particular crash which we had a really big forensic crash investigation while I was in the Victorian government, done on a big juicy 100-page report, forensic analysis. This vehicle was traveling at an estimated speed of 90 or 91 kilometers per hour, left the road, hit a power pole. It's actually going through a roundabout, even though I just told you how wonderful roundabouts are. But this was 2 a.m. 4 young male passengers. You know the scenario, I'm sure, unfortunately. But, these people maybe hopefully learn from their mistakes. Going through, lost control, left the road, hit the power pole. Actually, it might have been the other corner. But anyway, it might have been this corner. They're coming in here. 90 kilometers per hour. And it had a Raptor cushion, and it absorbed some of the energy, moved them along, and they all survived, minor injuries. And it's incredible considering the age of that vehicle and the speed they were going. But it was the energy absorbing, it was really clearly that device did a wonderful job. So to me, it's just more reinforcement that we need to really ramp up our thinking about energy management in the road environment. And we've got speed, we've got devices that can deflect energy, run energy along, but we really need to continue to ramp that up. Let me just check there if we've got any questions or comments that I need to deal with. There is a free webinar this afternoon on the application of OSRAP ratings. Thanks, Ken, for mentioning that. Funnily enough, that's where I'm about to go and present. I've been doing some work on integrating star ratings and OSRAP ratings into the road safety audit process as a slightly different thing. So that's through the Institution of Transport Engineers, and somebody's put the link there. Awesome. I'll see some of you there. Joseph Lee from Centre for Road Safety, Transport for New South Wales, presenting as the Federal Office of Road Safety. So it should be fun. You'll probably be sick of seeing my face on the screen by the end of today. Okay. In our last 5 minutes, and then I'll give you some time to do your quiz, I just want to show you your assignment. So you've got a quiz just the way you did before. And I'm just going to share my screen, jump us onto Moodle. So hopefully you've all got access to Moodle now. And if you don't, contact Emma or myself if you need, but contact Emma. We'll make sure you get in there because you need to get in there. Hopefully then you did your Module 1 quiz. Oh, I've got to unhide that Mythbusters episode from you. Sorry, you're seeing the back end now of this. In 2, you've got a quiz there, and then you've got your Safe System Module 2 assignment. So do the quiz, but you've got this Module 2 assignment. And what you won't see any of this, but you will see this. And you've got a Word document there. And I'm going to just open up the Word document. I've pre-opened it. Here it is. And it's got some instructions for you there. And you're going to fill out anything that's highlighted. So you're going to put your name in, and then you're going to pick an intersection. Now, it could be the intersection out the front of your house. It could be the intersection, you remember from, or, an intersection you're working on. It could be the one out the front of the office, whatever it is. You don't even need to go to this intersection. You can look at it in Street View. It's a very quick exercise. I don't want you to cancel your weekend plans to do this assignment because hopefully it'll take you 10 minutes, 15 minutes at most. What you're going to do is fill out the information below, inspect the site via Street View, or of course, if it's out the front of your house, you wander, or the walk you go on each night, you can have a quick look at it and fill out the information on table 2. So let's go here. So what I want you to do is type in here, factors that increase or influence the exposure. So 1 to 3 of those. So what's influencing the exposure? Remember, exposure is volume. Volume of vehicles, volume of pedestrians crossing, volume of motorcyclists, cyclists, right? So you might put in there the number of legs. You might put in the fact that it's, the major route to the shopping centre. You might put in there that, it's got 6 lanes, which means that lots more vehicles can go through there. But everything should be related back to a number of vehicles or a number of pedestrians or a number of motorcyclists or number of cyclists. Then you're going to look for likelihood factors. And you're going to say, what increases the likelihood of crashes at this intersection? Now, could it be the fact that it's passively controlled, so it's got give way signs only, or there's sight distance constraints, or it's got a see-through effect, or the sight lines are blocked, or it's got bad lighting, or the signs are faded, or the line marking is confusing, or vehicles have to do a right turn over multiple lanes of high-speed traffic. You're looking for likelihood factors. Then you go, what are the severity factors? What's influencing the severity of crashes? Speeds, angles, weight of vehicles. They're going to be some big ones, aren't they? Vulnerability of users. Then what I want you to do, so between 1 and 3 factors. So you can just put 1 or you can put 3, up to 3. Then one change that would alter the exposure to crashes. Remember, this is going to have to change the volume somehow. How are you going to change the volume of vehicles or pedestrians or cyclists or motorcycles exposed to traffic? You're going to have to somehow change the AADT or do something to change AADT or change pedestrian volumes crossing at grade or these sorts of things. Then alter the likelihood, maybe lighting, new signs, better line marking, sight line, opening up sight lines. And severity, angle alteration, speed alterations, installing devices that change some of those things, the speeds, the angles, the vulnerability of users. Now, this one, unlike the little extra, you're not constrained by budgets or anything like that. You are just really being marked on, did you categorize exposure right? Did you categorize likelihood right? Did you categorize severity right? Have you put things in the right spot? We will ask you to put a little link to the site via Street View and the like, so we can have a quick look at it as well. And at the start of the next session, we will ask for a volunteer and we'll jump in on Street View to their site. We'll have a look and they can talk us through some of this And I think everybody will find that quite interesting. So that's the assignment. It is due, it's definitely not due 20th of January, 29th of November, which is just before our session next week. So hopefully you'll be able to do that. As I said, it should not take you too long. Don't overcook it. Don't overthink this. Simply prove that you understand exposure, likelihood, and severity categorization. You've thought about it for a particular intersection, and jot some notes in there. So do the quiz. Do that. It will be marked. If you're concerned by it, please feel free to get in contact. I'm happy to chat with you through that, or give you some advice. Any final questions before I close off for today? All right. Well, I'll see those of you who log into the OSRAP star rating webinar at 4:30. Otherwise, I'll see the rest of you in our next session. Thank you for the wonderful input today. That was good. Great discussion. Thanks. Bye.